Have you ever wondered why it is that you hate Mondays? If you are among the lucky few who do not hate Mondays, I would guess it is because Monday is not the day that you have to go back to work. But for those millions or even billions of people in the world of 9 to 5 office work, Mondays produce a strange kind of existential crisis. What could be more ordinary than going back to work? What could be more normal than turning up for the day job that almost everybody has to do? And yet, the thought of returning to work on Mondays makes us feel sad, makes us feel fearful, makes us feel even a sense of dread or horror, a feeling that we are leaving behind our true selves, who we were able to be for the brief length of a weekend, and going back to play a fake self, a character who has been separated or severed from our true self. And who wouldn't feel dread at turning up on a Monday morning to work at Lumen Industries, the kind of dread that makes the character of Mark Scout, who I think of as a kind of tired Tom Cruise. What would have happened to Tom Cruise if he had had to turn up for a 9-to-5 job every day for the last 30 years instead of being a leading Hollywood A-list superstar, the kind of person who acts roles but always gets to be themselves, whereas most of us, like Mark Scout, act ourselves and have to spend most of our time playing a role, the kind of role that Mark plays when he turns up to Lumen Industries to work on the severed floor, the floor where every employee has been severed from their true self through a psychological, perhaps a chemical or a surgical process. And Mark Scout is engaged in introducing a new worker, Helly, who apparently enthusiastically signed up for the severance process, but as soon as they wake up in their new severed self, is determined to leave. This act of severance is a wonderful science fiction novum. At the heart of every great science fiction story is a novum, a new thing. This idea was identified by the academic and critic Darko Suvin, and it is this new thing, this novum, which gives science fiction its unique character, which Darko Suvin called cognitive estrangement, through the introduction into our ordinary world of this novum, this new thing. We are thrown into a state of cognitive estrangement that allows us to see the world differently. This new thing must be scientifically credible, because for modern audiences, we can no longer accept the metaphorical devices that once allowed us to enter the state of cognitive estrangement, the devices of fantasy, of fairy tale, the devices of magic that no longer seem credible to us. So instead, the new thing must have some kind of scientific credibility. And so in Severance, we are given the severed floor, where we're given some kind of vaguely scientifically credible novum to encourage us to look differently at what? Darko Suvin's argument was that the novum and cognitive estrangement and the characteristics of science fiction allowed us to look differently at our ordinary lives, so that those of us who are oppressed in our ordinary lives would have the tools and the motivation to resist. And what is more ordinary and what perhaps requires us more to resist than the experience of work, the totally ordinary, normal experience of work? Who would have thought that work could be oppressive? Severance is a project of Ben Stiller, who is one of those really interesting Hollywood movie stars who goes and creates mainstream romantic comedies, but then also as a comedian, as a comic, makes much more edgy, interesting, experimental, avant-garde works. And now that Ben Stiller seems to be breaking into the realm of television directing, he is the director of most of the episodes of Severance. He's brought some of those techniques of the avant-garde into a television show. And these are the techniques of absurdist theatre. The way that we have characters walking through endless corridors while perky elevator music plays in the background. The idea of having characters read the script of the show from a script, which they do a number of times in Severance. The idea of having characters dressed in suits and dresses as a kind of depersonalized uniform to match the abstract, minimalistic, bleak set designs of Severance. The moment where we have one of the characters asking for information about his only friend, the workplace buddy who has gone missing, and he's told that he can't have that information because if it was given to him, he would be violating the privacy of his friend. The way that we are shown that in the workplace, power is wielded through the language of safety and protectionism. And these are all the classic techniques of absurdist theatre. Absurdist theatre was first, the term was coined by the critic Martin Esslin, and he defined it as storytelling without a focus or a goal. That most central thing, that there must be some kind of goal or motivation in a story, but that the absurdists stripped that away, not to create comedy, the common meaning of the idea of absurd, but to show the absurdity of our lives, and particularly of bureaucracies. Absurdism, some of the great artists of absurdism were identified as Eugene Ionesco and Samuel Beckett. There's something particularly reminiscent of Beckett's iconic play Waiting for Godot in Severance, that we have these characters who seem to just be waiting for something that we do not know. And Albert Camus, whose essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, really tells us everything we need to know about the absurdist movement. Like using the iconic figure, the mythic hero of Sisyphus, who is damned by the gods to push a boulder uphill all day and then have it roll down again by the next morning, that we, as modern humans, in our relationship to bureaucracy, and particularly the emerging bureaucracies after World War II of Eastern Europe and the Soviet bloc, that were the focus of criticism of the absurdists, and to show what those bureaucracies were really doing. The absurdists stripped away story, they stripped away plot, they stripped away character to just show what was really happening within these bureaucratic systems of the communist world and how they did violence to the individual. And today, what could be more bureaucratic than our corporate lives? We have a story that helps to normalize the 9 to 5 jobs that we turn up to. That the corporation is something other than a bureaucracy. You see this most clearly in the trendy tech companies of the last decade or so, where the workers are turning up to something like a cool university campus, and they have canteens and they have places where they can sleep, because of course the corporate bureaucracy wants to dominate every part of your life and of your identity. And the corporate workplace doesn't directly do us violence. What does it do? What are we being shown through this novum of Severance? That the agreement we have with our corporate employers is the agreement of work, that we have the space outside work where we are ourselves, and we have work itself where we play a character, where we are severed from ourselves and we play a character who is controlled, who submits to the violence of the workplace, the passive violence where we are put through health and safety programs that determine our behavior, where we are forced into particular kinds of corporate uniforms that you see in the kind of now much pilloried corporate stock photography of the characters in the nice pressed shirts, and for the young women it's the plain black suit and the primary colored blouse. And these are all the characters that we are made to play in the workplace, because we are as much controlled by our corporate employers as we ever were by the bureaucracies of the communist world. And these are identities that we're trained into from a very young age, that our school lives are training for the corporate bureaucracies that we will be joining, and the violence of work that we will be experiencing, a violence that is almost hellish. And this metaphor, this analogy to hell is made in Severance, where we're given the excellent quote from someone's grandmother who's told them, hell is just the product of a moribund human imagination. But the bad news is that anything humans can imagine, we can usually create. So this isn't literally hell. Lumen Industries is not literally the afterlife, death, and the underworld of hell. But because we can imagine hell, we are able to create it. And the horror of hell, and in a way the horror of the violence of our corporate lives, is that we choose them. When the new girl in the workplace, Helly R., is given the opportunity to leave but chooses not to, and she says, so I have no choice. And Mark Scout, the tired Tom Cruise, says back, every time you find yourself here, it's because you choose to come back. And this is the last line of defense that is made about the violence that we experience in the corporate workplace, that we choose to come back. But of course, what choice do most of us really have? If we want to have our nice dinner party lives, and we're shown this part of the equation of the violence of work as well, that we can have our nice dinner party lives and friends, but only at the cost of the 9 to 5 severance, where we play our role. And it's that feeling of being severed from our true self, forced into a character for the majority of our lives, that is the true violence of work.